Hi, I'm Anne-Marie from BrambleBerry.com and SoapQueen.com. Thanks for joining me on today's episode where I'm going to be showing you how to make a clover and aloe scented spin swirl soap. The spin swirl technique involves pouring layers of soap into the mold. Once full, the mold is spun on the counter and quickly stopped using your hands. The stopping motion causes the soap to move back and forth, creating a beautiful swirl effect. This advanced technique was first introduced by a Taiwanese soaper named Mulan on YouTube and was then made popular by Amy of Great Cake Soapworks in her Soap Challenge Club. It's a really fun technique and results in a different swirl every single time. For this advanced technique, the trace of the soap batter is crucial. The batter must be thin and slow moving in order to pour the layers and create the spin effect. The key is a recipe with plenty of liquid oils and a fragrance oil that does not accelerate trace. My recipe contains 58% slow moving oils such as canola oil and sweet almond oil. I'm also using coconut, palm, and castor for balance. If you're unfamiliar with the term trace, I would recommend reading a blog post on SoapQueen.com called All About the Trace. It's full of information regarding thin, medium, and thick trace and how to manipulate them in your projects. You can find the link to that post in the video description below. To make sure that my soap does not become too thick, I'm using a tried and true fragrance oil that I know won't accelerate the trace of my soap batter. The Clover and Aloe fragrance oil from BrambleBerry.com smells incredibly fresh and it works great in cold processed soap. To mimic the green notes in the fragrance, I'm using Evergreen Mica and Kermit Mica from BrambleBerry.com to create two different green shades. I'm also using titanium dioxide and black oxide for contrast. If you've never made cold processed soap before, stop right now and watch the first 4 free episodes on cold processed soap making on Soap Queen TV, or read the first several chapters of my book, Pure Soap Making. It's important to learn how to use lye safely and get multiple recipes under your belt before you attempt this soap, which involves very advanced techniques. To get started, let's prep the colorants. Disperse 2 teaspoons of titanium dioxide into 2 tablespoons of a lightweight liquid oil. In this case, I'm using sweet almond oil, but any lightweight liquid oil will work. In separate containers, disperse 1 teaspoon of black oxide and 1 teaspoon of evergreen mica into 1 tablespoon of lightweight oil. And finally, disperse 2 teaspoons of Kermit green mica into 2 tablespoons of lightweight liquid oil. Use the mini mixer to push the colorant down into the oil to prevent any messy poofs of color. And then turn it on and give it a good blending. I mix these colors from light to dark because I really don't like dirty dishes. I also have a Soap Queen TV short on mixing colorants for cold processed soap, so check that out if you'd like a little bit more practice or information on mixing colorants. Now it's time to measure out our fragrance oil. Weigh out 2.5 ounces of clover and aloe fragrance oil in a glass container. Set aside both the fragrance oils and the colorants. In addition to my ingredients, I want to make sure that my soaping tools are fully prepped and ready to go for this very fast-moving project. For the spin swirl technique, I like to use a Lazy Susan to help spin the mold. This is optional. You can completely spin the mold directly on your counter, but I've found that a Lazy Susan makes it much easier. I've also lined my 9-bar Birchwood mold with a silicone liner to make unmolding easier. In addition, I'll be adding dividers to the soap at the end, so I'm going to put those together now. Check out the How to Assemble and Use Dividers for the Birchwood mold video for tips on using the dividers. Now I'm going to gear up for safety. I've got my long soaping sleeves on and long pants on, closed-toed shoes as well. I'm going to be putting my goggles on next. Goggles are extremely important to ensure that no lye splashes in my eyes during the soap making process. I'm also soaping in an area that has no children and no pets around and has great ventilation. I've combined my oils and I've prepped my lye water. Both my lye and my oils are right around 110 to 115 degrees. For this spin swirl technique, I prefer the soap to be just a teensy bit cooler to prevent the trace from accelerating. If you'd like, you can add sodium lactate to the lye water to expedite the hardening of the soap. The usage rate is 1 teaspoon of sodium lactate per pound of oil in your recipe, so we're going to add just about 2.5 teaspoons to the lye water. Carefully mix the lye and the oils together by pouring the lye water down the shaft of the stick blender. I do this because it helps to prevent air bubbles. You really want to get those air bubbles to the surface before you start mixing so your batter is nice and smooth. Alternate pulsing the stick blender and using the stick blender to stir the mixture. Continue stick blending and stirring until the soap reaches a very thin trace or just lightly emulsifies. I'm stick blending this recipe a little bit less than normal because I need my batter to stay really nice and thin. I can always stick blend more later. Once you've reached a very thin trace, split the batter evenly into 4 containers. It's okay to eyeball this, but each container contains right about 400 milliliters. To one container, add 1 tablespoon of dispersed titanium dioxide. To the next, add half a teaspoon of dispersed titanium dioxide and 2 tablespoons of the Kermit green mica. Then add 2 teaspoons of dispersed Evergreen Mica to the third container. And finally, to the last container, add 1 teaspoon of dispersed black oxide. From lightest to darkest, use a whisk to mix in the colorants. Since my soap batter is still so thin, I'm going to blend each color very quickly with my stick blender just to make sure the batter is fully emulsified. Now, add the Clover and Aloe fragrance oil evenly into the 4 containers. It's totally fine to eyeball it. Use a whisk to thoroughly mix in each fragrance. Now, let's take a look at that trace. It's still really thin, which is perfect. Place the mold on the Lazy Susan. Now it's time to start pouring. I'm going to pour the colors into 2 opposite corners of the mold. Each corner is going to have a slightly different color pattern. Try your best to stick with a consistent color pattern. If it's not exactly the same as shown here, well, that's totally fine. But keeping it consistent throughout will improve the look of the swirl. I find it easiest to pour 2 different colors into both opposite corners at the same time, and then switch those 2 colors and pour again at the same time in both corners. Then repeat this process with the other 2 shades. For each pour, count 1, 2, 3 to help keep those pours consistent. As you continue to pour the colors into the opposite corners, it will push the soap towards the center of the mold and fill it up. After every few pours, just take a look at your soap and make sure it's not separating. If it is, give it a quick whisk to help your soap stay fluid. To help prevent the soap from mounding anywhere, just go ahead and give it a little jiggle to make sure it's nice and even and flat. Continue alternating this entire design until all the color is used up. Begin to spin the Lazy Susan, stopping it quickly to give the soap movement. The centrifugal force created by the spin and stop movement moves the soap in various directions within the mold. Be careful not to spin too hard or the soap may spill out of the mold. Keep spinning and stopping the mold until the colors have begun to create patterns. Stick to one direction or switch directions, it doesn't matter. But a good place to stop is when the colors begin to blend together at the edges of the mold. Once you're happy with the spin effect, insert the divider set into the mold. Then, spray the top of the soap with 99% isopropyl alcohol to help avoid soda ash. Cover the soap and insulate for 24 hours. Because this soap contains a lot of liquid oil and was poured at thin trace, it will require more time in the mold. I recommend giving this recipe at least 5 days before unmolding. I'm going to show you how to release the soap from the liners now. First, turn the soap over. Pull gently from the sides. What you're looking for is an airlock to break. You should be able to see this. If the soap isn't releasing easily, now is when you want to stop and put it away for a few days. So assuming your soap's releasing nicely like this one is, push down gently. There we go. Okay, the soap is out. Phew! After unmolding from the silicone liner, I recommend letting the soap sit upside down for 1 to 2 days. This allows the bottom of the soap to harden, which makes it easier to remove from the dividers. I know it is so hard to wait this long, but since this recipe was made using a lot of soft oils and was poured at very thin trace, it requires a lot more patience. It's worth the wait. If we try to unmold from the dividers too soon, the soap will tear. Now that my soap has had a couple weeks to harden, it's time to gently remove the dividers. For this step, it's important that the soap is firm enough. If it's too soft, it will stick to the dividers and tear. Carefully flip the entire batch over so that the bottom of the soap is facing up. If you don't want fingerprints, you can use gloves or wax paper during this process. Push down gently on this corner bar and then easily release it from the dividers. The key to unmolding soap from the divider sets is to always slide that bar out, never pull it out. Wow, I love the way this swirl looks. It's really fun how each bar looks totally different. Once all the bars have been unmolded and cut, allow the soap to cure for 4 to 6 weeks before using to ensure that they're long-lasting in the shower and fully cured. Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of Soap Queen TV. Until next time, happy soaping!